Welcome to Two Guys on a Porch. Today's episode, we are talking about the movie Unforgiven, one of my favorites. We're also drinking Four Roses and a private single barrel from Jack Daniels, my personal pick. Come and stay with us. Good afternoon and welcome again to Two Guys on Our Porch. We appreciate you coming out and joining us on the porch. I'm Jason. This is Bradford. How you doing, Bradford?
I'm great.
Good.
Happy to be here on the porch with you today, Jason. Thank you for everyone else joining us in your locale, wherever that might be on your porch. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about maybe the greatest guy movie of all time.
Maybe, absolutely is.
It's one of the greatest movies, but it's certainly a guy movie. At least that's what my wife told me last night when I made her suffer through it as I watched it for about the 20th time. And that's Unforgiven. 1992, all-star cast, Clint Eastwood directed and produced. It's the last Western he's done. Also has Gene Hackman, Morgan Freeman, Richard Harris in one of his later roles. And every protagonist who's the major star is in their 60s when they're doing this movie.
I would go so far to say, in my opinion, it's the greatest Western movie ever. I mean, certainly let me reframe that. Certainly the best modern Western. I mean, maybe there's not too many in that genre nowadays, but you would be hard-pressed to find a modern Western better than The Unforgiven. I love it. It's one of my favorite movies ever.
Yeah, and I think the question that we really want to explore is why? Yeah. There's not a single redeemable character in the entire movie. They all have just almost complete moral failings. And yet they set it up. I mean, you got to give Clint Eastwood credit. You set it up that you're pulling for people and against others, but when you take a step back objectively, there's nobody worth pulling for.
Yeah, but it makes you feel at home because it's life. It's real life. It's the way life is, right? There's some redeeming stuff in this world. There's a lot of redeeming stuff in this world, and you like the world, but man, it can be pretty rough sometimes. There's a lot of bad going all the way around.
Yeah,
but let's not get to it. We're going to discuss. Where are we going to drink today?
So, keeping with the theme, because the movie is set in the late 1870s, early 1880s, they didn't have a lot of choices when it came to whiskey and what they were smoking, right. And we're kind of keeping it simple. So tonight we're smoking store label cigars. So most of the better cigar stores you go in have options. If you don't want to or can't spend big dollars, they'll private label some things.
Yeah.
And they will try to do so in a way that you can pick from mild to medium to really full-bodied cigars. These are probably on the medium range because that's what you and I tend to smoke most often. And so I thought, you know what? Give it a shot. And then what we're drinking tonight is single barrel whiskey. And we're going to just make a quick comparison between your Jack Daniels single barrel, which we've discussed and had in the past. And then we're going to compare that to maybe the first bourbon we've had a chance to really talk about, and that's Four Roses, which also harkens back to that era. Yeah. 1888 is when that label was founded. It was resuscitated in 2002 when it was bought by a Japanese company.
They're taking over the world.
Well, that's what they said about, every other foreign country for the last 50 years. And here we still stand.
It is more China now is taking over the world. But before, back in the day, you're right, Japan was buying
Yeah,
everything.
And then it was the Saudis and it was, whomever. But here we still are.
Yeah.
But Four Roses makes a number of things. We're going to compare their single barrel to the Jack single barrel.
So I think it's worth mentioning what is a single barrel. I mean, we talked about it before, but a lot of people may not know that. Most of the time for a bourbon or a whiskey, they will take several barrels and they'll blend those several barrels together and come out with their taste, be it whatever, Old Number 7 or, whatever, bourbon, whiskey you want to talk about. Single barrel is where they take and bottle just from that one barrel alone. And you would think, what's the big deal? But as we talked about before, depending on where that barrel is in the rickhouse, how it's aged, just how it moves, it can give it a lot of different flavor. You use the same recipe, but the barrel and what you get out of that barrel makes a big difference. And so from one barrel to the other barrel, and then also in this case, two different distillers, you get a different recipe from Jack Daniel's to Four Roses.
Yeah, and so when we taste bourbon, or any other American whiskey, but most particularly bourbon, we're dealing with a very similar profile and regulations around what makes bourbon. And what they don't do that Tennessee whiskey does, and they would argue, bourbon fans would argue that Tennessee whiskey doesn't need to do it, they're overdone, it's a gimmick, and that's the maple charcoal filter that Tennessee whiskey does, that bourbon does not. If you do that, you don't have bourbon. Everything else is the same. Has to be 51% corn at its base, and then they can do other things. And to your point about recipe, and I don't think we've talked about it with Jack, but their mash bill is 72% corn, or 80% corn, excuse me. So you get that's where that sweetness comes from. And then they do an 8% barley, and or 8% rye, and then the remainder would be malted barley. And anytime we talk about barley, it's all malted. Malting is the process where they soak it in water. It makes it bloom, if you will. It starts to grow, and that's what releases the enzyme that forces all of the others to begin the fermentation process. Four Roses is 72% corn, so it's probably going to have a similar profile in that it's not particularly high rye. It's going to be more on the sweet side. Bourbons are distinctive for that regardless. So I'll be real interested to taste these.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and jump in.
Well, I got jumping in. Speaking of, you were kind enough to cut my cigar. Thank you.
You're welcome.
But you gave me that big wide cut, and and thank you for cutting my cigar. But it reminds me why I don't like that wide cut, because I'm getting tobacco all in my mouth. I'm picking tobacco out. So thank you, but no thank you.
Well, these came with a knot on the end. So when they put the wrapper around them,
so you had to make that big
they
cut.
finished it out with a knot. And we could have done like they did in the Old West.
Chew it off.
And bit it off and spit it.
That's going to make a bigger, and tobacco leaves coming out as well. So, yeah.
So we didn't have much choice.
All right. Fair enough. Well.
So we did the guillotine cut.
Yeah. Yeah. I got to admit, I'm not liking the store brand so far. It's not, I can already taste the bad taste in my mouth already.
Yeah. And I would say that for what it is, and I mean, we're talking $4 or $5 cigar. I'd say it's pretty good value.
All right. Value proposition.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I don't think you're going to walk away going, this is a bad cigar.
Tuesday night cigar.
Right.
Yeah.
You're not stopping in at the gas station and getting a swisher. Well, you're upgrading in a major way from that.
I give you better than that. I give you that. It's better than a Swisher Sweet or something.
All right. So we're going to start out.
Oh, thank you.
With your Jack single barrel. We've tasted this before. And
yes.
Just as a color comparison, even though if you're listening you can't see it, but we're talking about beautiful amber colors.
Yeah.
And the Jack probably is a little bit darker.
Yeah, I think the single barrels, the one they pull out, they're the ones that are in the special spots in the rickhouse that for whatever reason get the better movement of the mash bill in the barrel, and they interact with the barrel more and bring out the flavor.
Yeah, so we'll take a quick taste of this. That's an old reliable.
Yeah, no, we picked it out, or at least I picked it out. You were not much help to me that day.
We're not going to have.
We're not going to go over that conversation again. No. But yeah, you were no help to me that day.
I talked you into picking the best one.
No, whatever. So, but yeah, good stuff here. One of my favorites.
Yeah, and I think as we grab the Four Roses, thank you. back to this movie.
Yep. The Unforgiven.
And I'm not gonna. We're gonna talk about it because if you hadn't seen it by now, I'm not spoiling anything.
No.
It's 30 plus years old.
Yeah.
And ironically enough, I think all of these guys are still living, except Richard Harris. But they're all in their 90s now.
Yeah.
So
is Morgan Freeman, he's still around?
I think he is actually. That's and that teases a future episode because one of the things we're going to talk about is the death of celebrities, and you put politicians and sports stars in that, and that you lose pieces of your past.
Yep.
When that happens, and so I think that'll be a worthy episode for us to cover that topic. But yeah, it's interesting that here we are 30 plus years later, and the main protagonists of that film are still living.
Well, I tell you what, I love The Unforgiven because to me, it talks about real people. Nobody's lived a perfect life, and we all have done things that we regret. And in this movie, nobody is a good guy. Nobody is a bad guy. They're all just kind of all bad. But you love them all. They all are playing different roles. You want to, the father, single dad, his wife died, and but come to find out he's a cold-blooded killer, and at the end of the day, they're not after justice. They're just trying to make a little change. They're just, he's a poor hog farmer now, and his hogs are dying, and he's just trying to make a living. But there's some great lines in that movie.
Well, one of the points that you make about the realism is, think back to a John Wayne movie, the most famous Western star of all time. And you don't really see him fail or flail. And in one of the early scenes when, Eastwood's character, Will Money, decides to ride off in pursuit of a few bucks to provide for his young kids, well, he falls off the horse.
Yeah.
He hadn't been on a horse in a while.
Yeah, he forgot how to ride.
And, so I think the first half hour of the film, he falls off 3 times. And that's more realistic, to your point about showing that realism. He goes out to make sure he can still fire a gun, and he can't hit the broadside of a barn with his pistol. Grabs a shotgun, and he does okay. But, it is real. The young kid in that, and I don't recall who plays him, all the bluster and braggadocio of what he's done in his past, and when he's really confronted with having killed one of the people that cut the prostitute that they're, avenging their death or their crime, well, he barely can live with himself.
Yeah. Well, he was faced for the first time, actually, mortality of man. I mean, that's one of the best lines that, the guy, I've forgotten what, is it Schofield Kid's the one you're talking about?
Yes.
I can't remember what he exactly said, but he was like, he's dead. I killed him just by pulling the trigger, and he's just out of his mind about it because it's the first time he truly killed anybody. And Clint Eastwood, his line was, "Yeah, hell of a thing killing a man. Take away all he's got and all he's ever going to have." And here it is. Here's this guy, just white knuckled from killing somebody, and
right.
And Clint Eastwood's the old school guy of like, yeah, killing a thing is like, yeah, it's a hell of a thing. Yeah, take a drink, buddy. Yeah, it was some great lines.
Well, and I think one of those great lines, which really sums up the movie and the point of our discussion, not that we're ending it, but at the end, when he goes into the bar, he's drunk. First time he's had a drink since his wife died.
He got to be a better shot after drinking. That's
apparently.
Yeah.
Steeled his nerves.
That's about the only realistic thing, only unrealistic thing in the movie is that somehow drinking made you a straighter shooter, and that's definitely not true. Don't operate a firearm when you're drunk.
Well, if you watch the WKRP from Cincinnati episode with Dr. Johnny Fever and Venus Flytrap, Johnny proved that drinking made your responses and reflexes much more effective. obviously that's a farce, but it was a
lies, damn lies, and statistics. Whatever. Don't consider your source on that. Yeah, woo. Yeah, not true. Yeah, physiologically, every other ways, it's not going to make you a better shooter. But in the movie, that's what it made him a better shot.
It did. So he walks into the bar. He tells Little Bill, the tough sheriff of the town, that he's going to kill him.
Yeah.
And
that's another great line. You're Bill Money out of Missouri, and you've killed women and children. That's what Little Bill says. And then, I'm sorry, I just love this movie. And Clint Eastwood, Will Money, he says, "Yes, I've killed women and children. I've killed about everything that's walked or crawled, and I'm here to kill you, Little Bill." He's just as factual and just straightforward as that.
I almost had chills from you saying that.
Whatever.
But yeah, no. That's because you're right. I went right back to that scene.
Yeah.
But he didn't end up killing him. Put him to the floor. He wins the bar fight, the gunfight. He's standing at the bar having a drink and realizes there's a gun cocked behind him. And Little Bill's gonna come over and shoot him, and he goes over there and steps on him, puts the gun in his face, and Little Bill says, I don't deserve to die this way," and I think this really sums it up. And he went, "Deserves got nothing to do with it," and pulls the trigger.
Yeah, and
I think that's really true. What we were talking about at the beginning is, deserves got nothing to do with the life we live.
That's right. Yeah,
and I consider myself very fortunate. I focus and intentional about living a life of gratitude in whatever the circumstances are. But yeah, deserves got nothing to do with it.
Yeah, you're very much right. That's a whole theme in life. We have had grace and mercy and stuff that we just don't deserve. We don't deserve to sit on this porch, drinking good whiskeys and hanging out, but here we are.
And you look at the hurricane victims that have suffered loss of life, property, everything they've owned, and you can say, well, they don't deserve that either. But I saw a couple interviewed, and they were so grateful that they could put their life back together and considered themselves so fortunate relative to others around them. And I just think about that attitude being so important to be able to move forward.
Do you think sometimes, it's hard to imagine why God allows tragedy, but, we always try to surmise why that might be. One of those things I think maybe that is, it allows us, the people who have not undergone that tragedy, is to help the person who has undergone that tragedy. So this is an opportunity for us to do something redeeming in our lives, help somebody who's down. While it may not rectify things completely, but it's something to do good in life and help people. It gives us an opportunity to do something good.
Yeah, I think we learn more from our failures than from success.
No doubt.
Whether that's our own failures or circumstances in which we find ourselves, and if we steal ourselves away and don't share that with others, then I think we've robbed people we come in contact with what we might have to offer in a positive way.
Absolutely. Sins of omission, by not doing, if you don't do that, reach out and help your brother. You should have done something, but you didn't do it. It's a thing of omission. You should have done it, but you just didn't.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with my dad after I got divorced. I pursued having all of the theological questions correct in my 30s and knowing all the right answers. And here I am going through a divorce, and there's public embarrassment attached to that. And my dad said, "Does it change the way you view God and your relationship?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you this. I have more questions than I had, and I'm okay with not having all the answers. God's God, and I'm not, and I'm good with that."
Yeah.
All right, so 4 Roses. Have you touched it?
Oh, absolutely. I love it. I'm biased because I picked out the one single barrel, but I gotta admit that Four Roses single barrel is pretty good. This is mine here, but the single barrel Four Roses. I mean, Four Roses is a premium brand, so they're not going to pick. They're not going to put a single barrel with their name on it that's not good. What you have to worry about is you go to the liquor store, and I'm making up a name, Little Eddie's liquor store, and he had asked them to send up him a single barrel so he can just put it on the shelf. Who knows how good that's going to be? Little Eddie probably didn't go down and taste it himself. They just sent him a barrel, and there it is. But Four Roses, this is good stuff.
Yeah, and price point on this, I think it is a premium brand. Single barrel's a little more expensive
Yep.
than their standard offering, and it's about $40.
Yeah, but how much is it? That would be a good thing to taste. Is their single barrel that much better than their regular stuff?
Yeah, I mean, that is a good question because what we talked about earlier, it's the same recipe.
Yeah, and they're picking out the barrels. The same distiller who's doing the main bottling is picking out their single barrels as well.
Yeah.
And so they're looking for the same thing. Maybe it's a little bit different, but I think marketing is a thing, and you can't ignore that. It's they're putting something out there and hoping you'll pay a little extra for it because it says single barrel, and you probably don't realize what that means. You think that's better.
Now, I bought this because you said, let's have another single barrel to compare it to.
Yeah.
But my point earlier, I would never buy a single barrel because I don't know exactly what I'm getting relative to another barrel. I would buy their standard offering, which, by the way, is about $25 or $30. And same mash bill, you're going to get pretty good bourbon.
This is good. I mean, that's I dare say, if you were doing a blind taste test, you would pick this out as a higher priced bourbon than
I would think so. Yeah, and it's kind of like the cigars. There's some value here, right?
Yeah, but that cigar.
Well, is there any value to it from the cigar standpoint?
No, well, the value to it is it's $4 or $5, and so yeah, it's better.
Maybe you're just a cigar snob.
I don't think so. Really,
should we try Swishers next time?
No,
do a taste test
don't.
with those?
No, let's not go there.
We could do a whole episode on gas station cigars and whiskey.
No,
well, they don't sell whiskey, but
so the taste test for a cigar, is it going to leave? What's the taste of my mouth going to be like tomorrow morning?
Yeah, the cat shit in your mouth test.
Yeah, and it's going to be bad in the morning. I'm going to brush I might get up tonight and brush my teeth after that cigar.
I wonder. I want to make sure the listeners are familiar with that very scientific test.
Yes.
And if you've, you can only imagine.
Yep.
I would hope there are people out there who've not actually had a cat shit in their mouth.
Yeah.
But
it is the South, though.
Well, that's true. But there are rednecks everywhere. But suffice to say, the idea of that taste after you've gone home, you've brushed your teeth, you've used mouthwash, I mean, you've brushed your gums, everything, and you wake up in the morning and it tastes like a cat shit in your mouth. That was not a good cigar, or at least not one I'm smoking again.
No, it's not. It's not supposed to leave you with those type of bad memories. So, no.
Bad memories. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. So you suspect this cigar would do that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It definitely is.
And I don't know whether I'm just happy to be sitting here smoking a cigar, or whether I just think it's pretty good.
Well, it's like you keep. It's like your buddy saying, "Here, smell this." It's like, "Oh, that's horrible. Let me smell it again." I mean, it's just you.
I don't know. I'm pretty happy with this.
Really?
Yeah. So I think the point is, especially if you've got a relationship with a place you buy cigars, ask them. They'll be honest with you. Yeah, they're trying to push cigars, but they're happy to tell you honestly. Particularly if they know the profile that you like to smoke, they'll say, man, don't buy those. Or, yeah, I would try this. They usually have a couple of different varieties in the lower price point. So I think you're safe doing that.
Well, I mean, I guess the bourbon version of that is, they, they had their bourbon made at, was it MPG?
Yeah.
Or and you just so they came up there, they blended there, and they smacked their label on it. But it's they make the same place makes the bourbon for this label and makes it for this label. And it's all the same stuff. It just has a different label on it.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point, because one of the bourbons, a couple of bourbons we're going to talk about in a future episode, is Frank August, which is maybe the newest bourbon on the market, but it has really taken the bourbon world by storm for those that kind of live in that world. But it was a New York guy sitting around during COVID with a lot of money and who said, "Yeah, I think I want to start a bourbon."
Yeah.
Well, he had to go to MGP to get the source initially. I think now, here we are, I think it was released in 23. They've just now started to have an opportunity to bottle their own bourbon that they put in barrels and aged. It may be young, 2 or 3 years at this point. And usually it's got to age for a little longer. This Four Roses single barrel, it's between 7 and 9 years.
Wow.
And I think as a result, it's smooth and flavorful as a result.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the people out there in the audience don't have the opportunity to taste the single barrel that we have here, the Jack Daniel's single barrel, because it's the one unique. I still like it better, but it's all to your taste preferences. So.
Oh, 100%. I would choose the Jack Daniel's single barrel all day long.
Do you think is there a cigar place that makes a generic cigar making place? You think there's a generic cigar place? You would go down to Cuba and get our own private labeling cigar. Cuban cigar.
That's a great point. 2 of my children had the opportunity. This is a great story. 2 of my children had the opportunity to go to Cuba for different reasons at different times, and
communist revolution.
Well, one was a pure educational opportunity.
Okay.
But on one of those days off, they got to go out to a farm and buy cigars that had been rolled, and my stepdaughter brought me some of those. And I don't know if the cigar was great or it was the idea that it was a real Cuban cigar.
Yeah.
That she saw, she didn't see it rolled, but she saw the farm on which that tobacco was grown. And so that was a really enjoyable smoke. And my son had an opportunity to go down there with, it was water filter mission, which was interesting because there are plenty of places that water filters are useless because there's no running water. So if you drank the water they use, which is out of a barrel collected from rainwater, it'd kill you. We don't have the immune system built up to withstand that without being sick. But he was out on the farm. They had to take horseback to get there. They bought so much of what they had, they actually did see them roll it, handed them those cigars, and he brought those back.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, yeah. And again, I don't know if it was great or just the idea that
Nostalgia
you're smoking.
Of it. Yeah.
You're smoking,
That's cool, though.
Very cool. Yeah. So I think as we look toward approaching the end of our episode, circling back to Unforgiven, I think you're right. It is a situation where we've all got mistakes we regret from the past and a life that we might live differently. But to some degree, as Will Money proved at the end of that movie, you kind of are who you are.
Deserve's got nothing to do with it.
Deserve's got nothing to do with it. I think that's 100% right.
That sums it up right there. That woke Kimber up. We didn't introduce Kimber earlier. Yeah, this is Kimber, everybody. She's just sitting out in the porch with us.
And by the way, if you're listening, Kimber is a dog.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always forget. You got a camera in your face. You forget some people just listen. Yeah.
So I think that's helpful to note. Kimber is a wonderful dog.
She's the quiet dog. Yes, you're a good doggy.
Looking longingly at you.
Yeah, she's my wife says she's my girlfriend, so she just loves me. Yeah.
Well, I think this wraps up another episode of Two Guys on a Porch, and we certainly appreciate you joining us and hope you join us next time. Again, Two Guys on a Porch.
Thank you. Come out and hang with us another time with Two Guys on a Porch.
Life is much better with friends, a drink, and cigar, and some Two Guys on a Porch swag.
Let us know what your drink and cigar of choice is at twoguysonaporch.com, and you'll be entered into a drawing to get some two guys on a porch swag.